Question regarding Saint Dionysius and then Saint Maximus' appropriation or kind of echoing Saint Dionysius' thoughts on beauty, and in particular vis-a-vis the creation. So this is from page 75 of your book, essentially where you're talking about the being drawn out of the chaos by the beauty, and that kind of being the impetus for creation. And so I guess the question is that do you find that in other fathers? Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't know. Although I do want to say that I think it's important to, because God, transcends gender, and although we're taught, of course, by revelation to refer to him in male terms, and I respect that. The idea that God commanded and the world was created, right? It's just a very masculine. The idea that God revealed his beauty and sort of aroused eros, that seems a little more feminine. Probably an account of creation, to be full, can include both emphases, and probably, that's something that in our own life of as creators we can relate to. But in terms of the patristic tradition more generally, I mean, I think the only really controversial thing in the book, well, maybe not, but it might be this idea of what happened in the Garden of Eden, that, the forbidden fruit was actually a forbidden section of the garden where they beheld Christ crucified. Hey, go in there and you'll be like God. That's why he doesn't want you to go in there, because you'd be like him. And lo and behold, that is how we become like God, isn't it? Is, through carrying a cross and through being crucified out of love for our fellow man, or if you're a man married to a woman, of your fellow woman, your wife and your children. And so, but there seems to be traces in the tradition, and it's certainly in the hesychastic tradition, that this Dionysian view of creation is the controlling one. Yeah, the hesychasm is a kind of Sabbath, right? It's a kind of the ever-moving rest that Maximus describes of God. It is a kind of ceasing of our own, labors in our terms or in our understanding for some new life as the bride of God.
You use the term truth first and beauty first, and then say goodness first. But those two are the ones that you mostly maybe discuss as ways to describe different approaches to reality. These terms make sense given the Western philosophical tradition from which they come. Are there other terms that might better reflect something closer to a patristic worldview?
Sure. I think the Orthodox way to express it, would be more something like that the noose is capable of a knowledge that is beyond discursive or analytical reason. It is nevertheless rational. And that would be, and it becomes more rational by being purified. So as we're purified of the passions, the noose sees things with increasing clarity. There's an analog of this, in secular science, let's say, or whatever, in natural science. The analog is organically complex systems. And the analog to the purification of the self, that Jane Jacobs proposed already in 1961, in the death and life of great American cities is that you cannot understand what you do not love when in terms of complex systems, and that this is not in the same way a limitation in understanding the other two kinds of science. So, so it's an analog, but you can't limit it, right? Now, if I was going to write, let's say, a philokalia, let's say, about where we're really talking about not the analogs to the noose, but the noose itself, I wouldn't have the expertise for that, because I don't have, I haven't paid give blood, get spirit. I have not paid that price, but other people can. I suppose someone could be offended by the book. It's almost like saying, is this a way to, like, I mean, in those terms, like, what are you saying, that it's acceptable to settle for, a secular analog to the noose or something? I don't think so. I just think that a monastic, let's say a person who's with a purified noose, would just totally understand the three kinds of science. Just get over yourself. Just use the one you're supposed to use. Move on.
Mm-hmm.
Wrap up. Get back to your prayers. What we live in is a mechanistic worldview. I mean, we live in, we are creatures of the machine. T.S. Eliot. We're trying to be efficient cogs in an efficient machine, and when the machine breaks down or turns out to be not a machine, we get really angry at our coworkers or our situation, our political leaders, or whatever.
Yeah.
What was the next question?
This gets kind of specific to something early on. You discuss Saints Boris and Gleb as examples of the authentic Orthodox Christian attitude towards violence. How would you respond to those who point to warrior saints such as Saint Stefan Milutin of Serbia, Saint Alexander Nevsky, and Saint Stephen the Great of Romania as examples of Orthodox saints who some have characterized as men of war? And then relatedly, what do you consider to be the relationship between just war theory and Orthodox Christianity?
Yeah, I think there's a place for it, as I say, somewhere like in a footnote or somewhere in chapter 1. I think just war theory is very helpful. It's the basis of international law. It's the basis of a lot of things, and it gives all kinds of nice guidelines, and it's helpful. The issue is that it has a limitation, and it's like a mathematical system that is not self-complete, and that is that even in a just war, we tend to experience spiritual harm. So this is a problem. Now we do have warrior saints, and I don't understand completely, their psychology or how God protected them. But God does seem to call certain leaders up for those tasks and to do certain things. The church places a dividing line between that and the priesthood. That the bloodless sacrifice is not available even to someone who's killed accidentally, normally, and this is so there is a demarcation there, but there are holy warriors, and I think I only say this in passing in one of the early chapters that war can also build virtue and build character, and it can bring out the best, and it can bring out, but it's not so easy to just walk away from it and reintegrate to this life. It leaves some kind of a wound. I think too, each of us have callings. You think about, let's say, what was the Jewish response to the Holocaust? It was ever remembrance and to get out there and subjugate someone else, called the Palestinians. And that could be rationalized and etc. And Palestinians have done bad things as well. But what was the response of the of the gypsies to the Holocaust, the Roma people? They just totally forgot and had more children. And they live all over Europe in this semi-invisible way, but on their own terms, they have continued to grow and flourish with no memory that they were special victims of the Holocaust. What is the one group in this country that has grown the most demographically in the last 100 years? It's the Amish. So there's a lot to be said for the people that just take it in the face, and it's not as impractical as we think. It's not necessarily impractical, even. It's not as heroic. It's not, I don't watch as many movies about that as I do about the other way.
Indeed.
But I'm not knocking the other way. I'm just, what we're trying to say here is that you cannot make an idol out of that, and an idol out of that rage, or an idol out of that thing. It comes at a cost, and it's yeah. Maybe I didn't get it exactly right, but that's roughly what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't recall in the book, actually, that's another question that we could have probably posed, and maybe I will. Since you brought it up, it was, I guess you could say, controversial, or at least in the sense of, like, it certainly makes sense. But where did it? Where did it come? How did it come to you?
I think you know. Here's why. I had written in, I don't know, 2007 or something, a book called an article called "The Marriage of Priests Towards an Orthodox Christian Theology of Gender," and that's the basis for chapter 5, I guess. Although it's shorter and far more beautiful, I think the article is, and it has a lot more meditations on the Virgin Mary, and so it was, that notion of the Virgin Mary as the new Eve, and then that really intensified, like that. So in other words, if the Virgin Mary stood by the cross and reacted a certain way, then Eve also saw the cross and reacted a different way. So that symmetry, or that mirrored symmetry, seemed to control. It seemed to me that had to be true. But in the dissertation, I had discovered something, which I still think is the most interesting thing for the church, which is this lost meaning of life in the grave. That all the three stanzas of the Lamentations on Holy Friday night all refer to the Virgin Mary. The middle one, the Actionistine, of course, that's a hymn revealed for her. The last one, Every Generation, that's her, all generations will call me blessed. But the first one, Izoe and Tafel, is also a Marian reference, because that's the Septuagintal name for Eve, is Zoe. So that discovering that hidden thing, lost for 800 years or whatever, right in front of us, right in the heaviestly attended church day of the year, that really impressed me as a sign that this mirrored symmetry of Panagia and Eve had to be true. And then I think it was just a lot of compassion for soldiers, as described in Achilles in Vietnam. Okay, what is trauma? It's to behold Christ crucified in yourself or in others. It's beyond your strength. In a way that carries a seemingly revelatory force. So it's very aesthetic, right? It's all just, everything works, but it feels right too, about actual pain in people's life. So that's why I put it down. The aesthetic isn't enough, but the aesthetic is a clue that what the heck. and an interesting aesthetic, right?
Yeah. Well, it definitely feels right. Yeah.
And it's a teaching you don't need to press. Just let it go.
Right.
I say what I try to say to my students at the end of every ethics semester is, okay, we've had a good semester. We've talked about sort of the ins and outs about, from 30 years of meeting saints. Here's how they do it. Now, my final words are: try to forget everything we've just said and just go live your life. Because if you've been taught it and you forget it, if it's true, you'll rediscover it. You'll be prepared. You'll be ready to rediscover it for sure and know it for yourself. They don't need to remember a thing from my class. They could just now. These days, the federal government mandates assessment. They want to know that their money is being spent and our students are on student loans. So they do get a final exam about ethics, and they predictably can't answer a thing. So, I'm trying to go a little bit against that. But it is good advice. It is good advice. Read the Ethics of Beauty, master it, and just forget it and go live your life. Because ultimately, it's an invitation to some kind of an adventure of the noetic life. As is conveyed in the liturgy, in our services, in our monastic traditions, in the lives of the saints, in the Gospels, in everything, in the air that Orthodox breathe. It is so there. So you don't need to remember anything. Just forget it all. Go live your life. If it's true, you'll rediscover it.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yep.